China will run out of money by 2035? World economists are begging Beijing to take China's economic downturn seriously. The world economy hasn't been the same since the COVID-19 pandemic, and China was hit the hardest. Beijing claims China is well on its way to rebuilding its economy to its former glory. The truth paints a different picture, though. Instead of the thriving 2030 plan, they're actually expected to run out of money before 2035. Today's video is about China's severe housing crisis. What does it mean for the people of the world's second largest economy? The overambitious China 2030 plan. In 2012, the World Bank prepared the China 2030 plan. This succeeded the China 2020 plan, which was designed with the intention to make China a rich country by the end of the decade. The 2020 plan was drafted in 1998. It didn't take long for the People's Republic of China to realize something. They were falling behind on their yearly goals. It's surprising when you look at the numbers. China's had a stable 5% GDP growth for as long as anyone can remember. The country boasts the world's second strongest economy behind the United States. The country has amazing resources and some of the best scientists we've ever heard of. Economists are always raving about the country's potential. What went wrong? It was never right to begin with. World economists have accused China of manipulating their reports for the longest time, only presenting a false image of stability. The jury's still out on that. It doesn't matter if Beijing was lying or not. It looks like their stuttering numbers are finally catching up to them. The 2030 plan was designed by the World Bank, specifically to mend China's horrible economic policies. The country might have a strong economy, or at least it did. Yet they were never considered a rich country. Why's that? Because the Chinese public is starving for resources. In comparison to U.S. Social Security services and unemployment benefits, China offers a mere $410 to the U.S.'s $1,700. Beijing is only willing to give out $410 as a pension to its elderly living in urban sites, and less than $100 to those in rural sites. The public fund offers nominal relief for health issues. Health benefits are, honestly, laughable. The one thing that China could boast about was its many housing schemes. Now, though, it looks like they're falling behind on their 2030 plan. And they probably don't have enough money to defer it to a 2040 plan either, or even 2050. Things are looking bad for China, and the housing crisis is at the heart of the problem. The housing crisis. China's always prided itself on its housing sector. Did you know that in 2018, China underwent a massive housing project that promised to deliver 1,700 units? That's in excess of the massive urban population looking for homes. Now, though, it looks like even the people who were promised homes this year are on the streets. The housing crisis is multifaceted. On one hand, you can argue that the country hasn't been able to recover from the economic downturn from COVID-19. Now, even though that's an oversimplistic way to write off a huge issue, let's start with that. COVID-19 economic crisis. China was faced with a major issue in 2019. The country was ostracized for introducing the world to a deadly virus. China had to find a way to limit the spread of the virus. It did so by imposing one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. There was a 2-month period at the start of the pandemic when things were miserable. Even the most affluent of Chinese citizens were not allowed to leave their homes, even to go get food. In a nutshell, things were going horribly bad for China, and Beijing was focused on restricting its spread. Since that took precedence, the government halted all major development projects, including housing projects. During the pandemic, China's GDP dropped by 6.8% for the first time in years. A major cause was the housing downturn. People had been moving to urban cities looking for better employment opportunities. To control the spread of the virus, construction companies had to halt their plans. This resulted in an outpour of homelessness. People weren't contributing to the economy because they didn't have a roof over their heads. Once things stabilized too, they didn't have the resources or income to upgrade to urban life. This meant that the housing sector's realistic plans were becoming over-ambitious. People weren't ready to move anymore, and the huge housing schemes weren't necessary. Investments weren't coming in like they were expected to. Obviously, this meant that the real estate sector had to suffer through a loss. Unaffordability. Another reason why China is facing a housing crisis is because of unaffordability. This was China's only playing card. Providing benefits to the elderly, unemployed, and young working force was this thing. Affordable housing schemes. COVID-19 restrictions, businesses shutting down, and massive-scale layoffs. This meant that people didn't have enough money anymore. Still, there was another issue. Housing has increasingly become more and more unaffordable in China. This is because wealthy investment companies tend to splurge on housing, drive up the prices, and restrict people from rural areas from moving to urban sectors. Investments have always been welcomed. However, in China's case, these investments have resulted in luxury apartment complexes. That is far too unaffordable for the average working class. China has seen massive inflation over the past few years. The cost of living has gone up, and now so has the cost of housing. Real estate has been a popular investment option in China, with many individuals and investors buying multiple properties as a means of wealth accumulation. This has driven up prices and reduced the availability of homes for owner-occupiers. Local governments in China often rely on land sales and property development for revenue. This can lead to a bias towards promoting real estate projects, even when it may not be in the best interest of affordability. WhoCal System. China has been following the WhoCal system since the 1950s. You'd think that a system that's been in place for so long would act to benefit the Chinese population. However, the WhoCal system has actually contributed to the Chinese housing crisis. So what is this system? Every Chinese citizen is required to be registered in a specific location, typically their place of birth or where their family is registered. This registration is known as their WhoCal. An urban WhoCal is associated with residents of cities and provides access to urban social services, including better education, healthcare, and employment opportunities. Rural WhoCals are linked to those in rural areas who may have limited access to these services. This is because access to social services such as education, healthcare, and housing subsidies is often tied to the WhoCal category. In urban areas, housing prices are often significantly higher. Individuals with urban WhoCal status may have better access to affordable housing options. These benefits can include access to subsidized housing or eligibility for certain housing assistance programs. As a result, urban WhoCal holders may have an advantage in securing affordable housing, creating disparities between urban and rural residents. The question, obviously, is why don't people just move to avail better opportunities? Naturally, it's a lot easier said than done. The WhoCal system historically placed significant restrictions on internal migration within China. Moving from a rural to an urban area could be challenging, as urban WhoCal was often required to access certain job opportunities and social services. Real estate developers are filing for bankruptcy. In 2021, Evergrande, one of China's leading real estate developers, filed for Chapter 15 bankruptcy. This came after years of speculation over the developers' troubles keeping up with their promises. Evergrande had been defaulting on their loans for a long time. They believed that it'd take just one more development to set it on track. Interest rates kept piling up, the cost of labor and construction equipment skyrocketed, and the company was not turning over a project. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Evergrande defaulted on over $300 billion. Evergrande was on its way to completing several million-dollar projects. In the end, the Chinese public was left with nothing more than half-completed projects. However, besides the Chinese population scrambling for housing, investors were also losing hope in what was once believed to be China's most stable sector. Obviously, Beijing stepped in. Things were, however, only just about to get worse. Country Garden, a project arguably larger than Evergrande, announced that they too were on the verge of filing for bankruptcy. Country Garden is currently overseeing the largest housing project China has ever seen. However, because of the skyrocketing interest rates, elevated costs, and one bad decision after another, they're facing a crisis too. Country Garden is one of the few major home builders to have avoided default since Beijing introduced a 3 red lines policy in 2020 that was aimed at reining in the debt levels in the highly leveraged sector. The red lines set limits on liabilities to asset ratios and ensure companies hold cash reserves equivalent to at least 100% of short-term debt. The 3 red lines in question are liability ratio, debt growth rate, and interest coverage ratio. Dan Wang, the chief economist in China for Hung Seng Bank, said that the government's 3 red lines policy has been a success in de-leveraging the sector. However, it's too drastic a change in a very short period of time. He claimed that it created a downward spiral in the liquidity situation for property companies. The fact that mega projects such as Evergrande and Country Garden are filing for bankruptcy or are near bankrupt is a clear indication that the housing sector is plummeting. What does this mean for the future? A collapse of the housing sector in China could have significant and far-reaching consequences, both domestically and internationally, due to the central role of real estate in the Chinese economy and global financial markets. The public relies on housing more than anything else. If the housing crisis continues, it will give rise to several other problems, namely economic downturn, unemployment, social unrest, and weakening China's financial institutions. It's also important to remember that China is a global leader, and companies from all over the globe have invested in its many housing schemes. To Beijing's credit, they've already huddled to come up with a relief plan. The government has restricted the shadow banking sector's influence, offered bailout loans, and attempted to provide temporary accommodation to those who already moved to cities. Economists, however, argue that China's still a long way from stabilizing the housing crisis. So, what do you think? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more.